So this is my friend Tom. Works at the BBC, and a good man with a tough problem to make a natural history product on a limited budget. BBC, of course, got tons of natural history footage, best in the world, some say, but all of it long-form programming, gathering dust in an archive in Bristol. So Tom took a scientific model, been around for a little while, from Carl Linnaeus, adapted it a bit, and then chopped up all that long-form programming into little chunks that fit that model. And he used it to build one of the most popular sites in the BBC portfolio now, and something that has set the template for all BBC development to come. Hello. I'm Mike. I used to work at the BBC, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about domain modelling. What do I mean by that? Well, domain modelling really is kind of mental modelling. It's a sort of applied mental modelling that talks about the things within a subject, lions, tigers and bears, and the various relationships between them. It's where IA, which wasn't on the chart before but is a real thing, meets content strategy, which is also a real thing, allegedly. And is a sort of applied IA that is very sympathetic to the meaning that's inherent within the content, unlike what IA sometimes did in the past, which was to classify documents by type and say this is a news post and this is a blog post and this is a video and this is an audio clip. And it makes us think about the more abstract connections between things within a subject. This being music, for example, artists, tracks, releases, types of releases, how they come out and the labels that they come out on, and the sort of ontological, if I dare say that, relationships between them. And it's not just for things like natural history or big classical subjects. It can be used for pretty much anything. This is a simple version for food. So let's look at it a little more detail. This is something I've been working on about live music, right? It might seem a bit complicated at first glance, but you can soon start to unpick it. Say you've got a performance. That's going to be a performance that's come from an artist. It's going to have a number of tracks, a set list, if you like, which is a thing. Might vary from show to show. And then that feeds into a musical work, which is our fancy name for a song, which might have a genre. Indeed, the performance itself might have a genre. If it's Bob Dylan doing some weird kind of bluegrass set. The artist, if it's a band, might have a lineup. Those lineups play instruments. The performance can be part of a tour potentially, which belongs to a promoter. The performance has an event, which is a date and time that it goes on, appears at a venue has a place, and then suddenly, interestingly, we're getting here into the realm of not live music, but in fact recorded music, which is a whole other subject domain in itself. And this is, a signal is sort of an audio bit of audio that can come out, as we saw before, on a label at a certain time. So when we talk about subject domains, soon we find that there are boundary objects like this, where one subject domain feeds into another. This is a cool example from the BBC, where we've got a Mad Men program page. It's got the track listings of songs played in that program. There's Bob Dylan again, and through the wonders of translating PowerPoint to Keynote, that line is broken, but we have a link there to the Bob Dylan music artist page, and suddenly we've moved from TV into music. Woo! Now, as you can imagine, when you're doing some domain modelling, it's all about knowing the subjects in some details. Now, I know nothing about football, truly the lowest form of sport. But if I wanted to know about football, I'd talk to somebody who did, perhaps Sir Bobby Charlton, perhaps even Melvin Bragg, and I would ask them, well, what's that all about? Matches, teams, goals, how do they fit together? And then I'd go and talk to some users, football fans, if I dare, and say, well, what do you think is important? What do you care about when you think about football? What are the things that come to mind, and how do they relate? What do you call them? Importantly, what do you call them? because that feeds into something that we call ubiquitous language that goes along with our domain model. And the names that we give things feeds everything. It starts off with those terms in those models, and then it goes through to things like CSS classes, and it ends up on user-facing menus. So the whole team not only knows the model, but knows the terms within, and can, you know, express the things that are within the domain. The idea is to get a kind of best fit model. This was one for Champions League that satisfies the needs of the experts, and indeed the common man who likes football, truly the lowest form of sport. And there it is, fitting part of the new BBC Sports site. The goals scored within a match are now objects. You can see the players that have scored those goals at the time that they've been scored. Each one of these is clickable. Pretty cool. So that's your model. How do you get your content? Well, good content is good. Normal content strategy rules apply. Content strategy, of course, is a real thing. So audit what you've got and go hunting for what you need. But importantly, go back to your model and check out the things within your model and use that as your checklist to see not only what content you've got and what haven't got, but how granular it needs to be to fit that model. By the magic of some PowerPoint foo, which now may or may not work. Oh, hello! Those long-form natural history programs were all chopped up into the clips that were about individual animals. Let's have another one. So you can take big long-form assets and maximize the value of them by chopping them up, fitting them into a model, and linking them together. And importantly, in this Wildlife Finder product, the links between various assets of content are easily as important as the content that's in the video clips themselves. Because if I want to click on a giant panda, I can find out where it lives. It lives in a broadleaf forest. It's herbivorous. And I can find out all the other things that are herbivorous or live in a broadleaf forest. And each onward journey is actually teaching me a new fact. And then there's business data. So that we got your core content, but how do you enrich that? Well, probably various places around your business or your clients' businesses. There's data that's probably being thrown away, but could be used to add more connective tissue, enrich content. Here on the BBC Music site is all the last times they played some Bob Dylan tracks, and it provides some currency and relevancy to an otherwise fairly static page. And if you haven't got the content, there's various forms of free content available. One thing that Wildlife Finder does do is take content from Wikipedia, conforms its URI structure to Wikipedia's, and so it's easy to map from one resource to another. Music site uses MusicBrainz for artist data. It's all free. And then we actually come to designing the user interface, UX. Tips for that. Well, each thing is a page. One concept per page, one page per concept. A bit like Wikipedia, right? And why? Because if everything is granular and focused, then it's easier to cite, and it's easier to blog about, and it's easier to link to, and it's easier to tweet about. And you're opening up a whole wealth of content, and it's better for SEO as well. And then you decide, well, which things are pages, and which things aren't really justifying pages. This is a detail from the BBC Programmes site. BBC Programmes has a page for every programme that goes out, 1,500 programmes a day across TV and radio. We know every broadcast that goes out, but it isn't really worth making a whole page for a broadcast, so these things get transcluded onto the page for the programme. And then think about the fact that really all things are collections of other things. These thing pages might seem like the root level object page, but in fact they're aggregations themselves of other objects, news, sound clips, video clips. Cleverly on the BBC site, each of these is actually individually addressable, but you don't need to know that. And then your higher order things, your list pages, are really just aggregations of your thing pages. So everything is a group of everything else. And plenty of context. We all know, right, that most people don't come to the homepage these days. They just deep link to content from Google and from Twitter. So all your thing pages, your landing pages, need to kind of do the job of providing enough context to let people know where they are. And again, this context can come from the business data that shows where this asset, this page exists in space. If you haven't got all that data, well then that's fine. You can have it in your model, but it doesn't mean you need to expose it right now. Here's some contributors, some actors from BBC programme. Is it Holby City? Can't remember. Eventually they will be linked, and you can find out all the other things that these actors have been in. Right now they're not, so what? Curation. Now people say this domain modeling thing is all very well, but it's kind of like it's exposing a relational database. It's a bit dry, it's a bit sort of inhuman. So we can add curatorial layers on top, and that brings that editorial timeliness, that kind of rhythm, that preference for certain things. And they just sit as sort of handpicked collections on top of this underlying order. They can be driven, this is Lanyard, which is another domain-driven site. They can be driven by users, they can be driven by natural sets within the data, like publisher's bestseller list, or indeed they can be driven by world events like greatest Olympic moments or something like that. And they can even be used to replace what was once a sort of a siloed, crappy microsite. I mean, this is the new Doctor Who site, newish now. It's in fact a curatorial layer over the Doctor Who programs that are in a domain model structure. Whereas this once was some hand-cranked piece of shit, it's now stitched into the ecosystem. So why should you care, really, honestly? Why should any of us care? I'm an IA, right? It's a real thing. It's, and I was a little shaken by this young upstart's blog post the other week. It resonated with me that we seem to be losing that IA phase. Increasingly, I see workshops about sketching and this and that's all very well, but what we're sketching is interfaces, and we're leaping straight to an interface design and not having so much of this sort of abstract information model, understanding how the concepts that we're trying to represent fit together. And we want something for clients to do, right? I know nothing about football, truly the lowest form of sport. But if I had to build a site like that, I want to go to my client and I'd say, well, tell me everything you know about football. Don't worry about whether something's red or blue or sits on the left or right, but tell me all about all your subject knowledge. Keeps them busy. We need to accept that increasingly we're going to this cross-platform, cross-device world. And although our interfaces may change accordingly, I mean, whether they're dedicated app, whether they're responsively designed or whatever, what's important is that the relationship between content, bits of content, remains intact. And beyond that, we need to accept that, in fact, a lot of people won't be consuming our content via a website at all, but via APIs, via various sort of data-driven methods. So as I like to say, and to sum up, we need to design for a world where Google is our homepage, Wikipedia is our content management system, and humans and robots are our users. Thank you for that. If you want to know more, the full version of this talk is available here, and this is a much smarter man than me who wrote this seminal blog post, which you should all read. Thank you.